So last week we looked at the reunion of Jacob and Esau, and after 20 years of separation, the reunion was one of long-lost brothers filled with joy and weeping, not a reunion of lifelong enemies, which seemed to better reflect the relationship that they had when they lived their lives together under Isaac's roof. So with Jacob's transgressions behind them, they've made amends, and they have now gone their separate ways. Esau is heading to Seir, which is known as Edom, and Jacob is heading towards Canaan, and these are in opposite directions on a map. We come to these final verses in chapter 33, which introduce us to what is the final section in the genealogy of Isaac. This will take us all the way to the end of chapter 35, which will record the death of Isaac and his burial at the hands of Jacob and Esau. So as we continue in the ongoing outline, letter K here is that Jacob returns to Canaan. So because of the length of this passage in its totality, we're going to look at each of these sections individually so as to not read through the entire thing and then break it down where we would not remember what we've read. So let's look at chapter 33, verses 18 through 20, and then I'll make some remarks about that. Now Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, when he came from Padan Aram and camped before the city. He bought the piece of land where he had pitched his tent from the hand of the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. Then he erected there an altar and called it El Elohe Israel. So what we see here, number one, is that Jacob settles in Shechem. And on the surface, Jacob returning to Canaan and settling here in Shechem appears to really not be any big deal. But in reality, it is a huge problem. And what we may not remember is what has transpired prior to Jacob's arrival here in Shechem. The big problem is this, letter A, Jacob breaks his vow. Because Jacob has broken his vow, everything that transpires in chapter 34 did not have to happen. This is not where Jacob was supposed to return when he left his home 20 years earlier. If you remember, when Jacob left his home on the first night that he camped out, having nothing but a backpack or a satchel, he camped out under the stars using a rock for a pillow, and this is where he had the vision of the heavens opening up and the ladder descending from heaven and the angels ascending and descending from heaven and God speaking to him. And it was at this time, after he saw these things, that Jacob said this in Genesis 28, 20 to 22, that Jacob made a vow saying, if God will be with me and will keep me on this journey that I take, and will give me food to eat and garments to wear, and I return to my father's house in safety, then the Lord will be my God. This stone which I have set up as a pillar will be God's house, and of all that you give me, I will surely give you a tenth. Well, God was with Jacob, and God blessed Jacob abundantly with more livestock than he would ever need, but he did not return to his father's house. Additionally, when Jacob relayed to Rachel and Leah the vision that he had while he was in the field related to the mating of the sheep, the striped sheep and the speckled sheep, if you remember that, he told them what God said to him, which was what was going to enable him to increase his livestock. It was going to be how the transfer of ownership from Laban's livestock to Jacob's livestock was going to take place. This is what God told Jacob, what Jacob told Rachel and Leah in Genesis 31:13. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar, where you made a vow to me. Now arise, leave this land, and return to the land of your birth. Now, while Canaan is the land of Jacob's birth, God's intent was for Jacob to return to Bethel, where he made his vow. Bethel is only a short walking distance from where Jacob was actually born, from where his father's house existed. Now, the reality of this is emphasized in Genesis 35, verse 1, at the end of the tragedies that take place in chapter 34, with God speaking again to Jacob. God said to Jacob, "Arise, go up to Bethel and live there, and make an altar there to God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau." Jacob never, ever, ever should have been in Shechem, and had he fully obeyed God, the events in chapter 34 would have never taken place. Now, kind of put that in the back of your mind, because we're going to revisit that reality when we get the end of the message, because this is paramount to everything that takes place. So Jacob has broken his vow, and that leads to a few things here. Number one, he buys land. Verse 19, he bought the piece of land where he had pitched his tent from the hand of the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. Now, this is far from just a temporary stay. He wasn't just going to camp out for a few nights and then move along. He has pitched his tent and bought land. He is in and among the Canaanite people. So while his father's house is in Canaanite territory, it is not in and among the Canaanite people. He is in a very close proximity to the people of Canaan by being in Shechem. The intent of noting this is to draw the reader's attention to the danger that awaits and the consequences that are going to come because Jacob has not fulfilled his vow. Number two, he builds an altar. Verse 20, then he erected there an altar and called it El Elohe Israel. Again, this emphasizes that this is Jacob's new home. By the way, this was the same location that Abraham stayed in some 125 plus years earlier. Abraham stayed here, bought land here for burial, built an altar here. Jacob is following in the footsteps of his grandfather, but this was not where Jacob was supposed to be. The name El Elohe Israel means God, the God of Israel. Now remember, Jacob's name has been changed from Jacob, the deceiver, to Israel, which is going to be the namesake for the people of God. And Jacob identifies his new self, his new character, his new identity with God, and he stakes claim to this land in and among the Canaanite people. So the buying of the land and the building of an altar are noble acts of faith, but he's too close to the city, not where he's supposed to be, and it's going to have a compromising effect on his family. Number three, we must note that there are significant time gaps here, and these are time gaps that we are not really told about. There are all kinds of time gaps that we have studied and looked at as we've gone through the narratives in Genesis. So based upon the events in chapter 34, the narrative cannot immediately follow the reunion of Jacob and Esau. If you remember Jacob's excuse for not following Esau and Esau's invitation to come with him to Seir, he said that the children were tender of age. That means that they were young, probably grade school. The oldest would likely be 12 or 13, the youngest being maybe 6 or 7. While we're not given any specifics, the best estimate is that Jacob was in Shechem for approximately 10 years or so, which is where the story picks up in chapter 34. This would make Dinah, the daughter, who is one of the youngest of Jacob's children, around 15 or 16, and the oldest boys who were born to Leah, just like Dinah was, Reuben and Simeon, in their early 20s. Now the rationale for that is, as we're going to see, Dinah is going to go into the city, and she's going to do that as a young girl who is of marriable age. And when the young men who go into the city and ravage the city, when they do that, they are in their early 20s. They could not possibly do that as very young teenagers. So the best estimates by the scholars are that after Jacob leaves Esau, he goes to Shechem, and he's there for about 10 years or so. And then the story picks up with what we're going to read about here in chapter 34. Letter B in the outline is the violation of Dinah. We're going to look at this in verses 1 through 4. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the daughters of the land. When Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he took her and he lay with her by force. He was deeply attracted to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the girl and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Get me this young girl for a wife." Now the first thing that we see here is that Dinah has gone out to visit the daughters of the land. There's a lot of wordplay here in the Hebrew language. The sounds in these words, and I'm not going to try to emulate them because it's a lot of guttural sounds and we really can't pick up on these very well. Plus it isn't very pleasant to hear when you don't understand the language. But for Dinah to go out and to visit the daughters of the land means that this 15 or 16-year-old girl has decided to go out on her own, unchaperoned, to observe the habits of the Canaanite women. She is either imprudent, not understanding the dangers that are out there, or she is showing impropriety because she wants to be seen by the Canaanite men. Now, thinking about this, living in the little clan that she's in, she has no boys her age, there are no suitors. So you might think it would be natural for a girl of marriable age who was bored in the house to go out and to see some suitors her own age. So she's either imprudent, not understanding the danger, or acting improperly by going out unchaperoned to see the men so the men of the city can see her. Now let me say this very, very clearly. This in no way places the blame on Dinah for what happens to her, but it shows how lazy Jacob has become in looking out for the well-being of his daughter, even if she is from the unloved Leah. Or it shows how negatively the influence of Canaan has affected Dinah's perspective on what she needs and what she wants. We cannot know. We aren't told. It's left up for our speculation. But a 15 to 16-year-old girl going out into Canaan territory unchaperoned is incredibly dangerous. Now, the Canaanites are known to be wickedly immoral, polytheistic people. As a reminder, the events that took place in Sodom and Gomorrah some 125 to 150 years earlier, as recorded in Genesis 19, took place in Canaanite territory. Sodom and Gomorrah are right smack in the middle of Canaanite land. Their wickedness, their immorality was one of the reasons why both Isaac and Jacob forbid their sons to marry Canaanite women. There was to be no intermingling of the blood because of the wickedness and because of the idolatry that existed amongst the Canaanite people. So here in these 4 verses, we're introduced to Dinah's attacker, Shechem, the son of Hamor, who is a prince. His position likely gives him a sense of entitlement. The Hebrew speaks very, very plainly. He saw, he took, he lay with her by force. Verse 3 provides for his motivation for us. He was attracted to her and he loved her. After violating her, he spoke tenderly to her. And experts tell us that that word tenderly means that he was attempting to either comfort her or he was trying to win her heart after seeing her, taking her, and forcing himself upon her. It shows the level of depravity that existed in the heart of that man, and perhaps in the man of Canaan in general. We are not told anything about Dinah's response. Verse 4 tells us that Shechem goes to his father and basically demands, "Daddy, I want you to go and get me this girl for my wife." That's the only interaction we are told about this. Letter C. Now we are told of the reactions of Jacob and her brothers. This takes us from verses 5 through 7. Now Jacob heard that he, Shechem, had defiled Dinah his daughter, but his sons were with his livestock in the field, so Jacob kept silent until they came in. Then Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. Now the sons of Jacob came in from the field when they heard it, and the men were grieved, and they were very angry because he had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing ought not to be done. Oddly, the reaction from Jacob is silence at the news that his daughter has been violated. With his sons in the field tending the livestock, he doesn't send word to them. He waits until they come back home. We're not told how the sons learn what has happened to their sister Dinah. And we're not told of any conversation that Jacob had with his sons. Verse 6 tells us that Hamor comes to Jacob and has some conversation with him, but that is not recorded for us. In verse 7, when the brothers learn of what has happened to their sisters, they are first grieved at learning of their sister's assault. That word grieved is a word that is used elsewhere to describe God's reaction towards the wickedness of man. When God looks upon the crown jewel of creation and sees the depth of the wickedness of man, it says this in Genesis 6:6, "The Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart." Grief very quickly gives way to anger, and the brothers are outraged at what has taken place. They describe this transgression as disgraceful. The word disgraceful means to have moral outrage at the vilest sort of atrocity. It is the absolute worst thing these brothers could ever imagine happening in all of their lives, is to have their sister assaulted. Nothing like this has ever been done in true Israel. So they're grieved as God is grieved over the wickedness of man, and they are outraged at this atrocity. Next, in letter D, we get the reactions of Hamor and Shechem. This is verses 8 through 12. But Hamor spoke with them, the brothers and Jacob, saying, "The soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him in marriage. Intermarry with us. Give your daughters to us, and take our daughters for yourselves. Thus you shall live with us, and the land shall be open before you. Live and trade in it, and acquire property in it." Shechem also said to her father and to her brothers, "If I find favor in your sight, then I will give whatever you say to me. Ask me ever so much bridal payment and gift, and I will give according as you say to me, but give me this girl in marriage." Faced with the outrage of the brothers of Dinah, the father begins the conversation with Jacob and the brothers by proposing marriage. I don't know if anybody fell off the seat of their chair that marriage is being proposed, but this is what the father of the attacker proposes to the father of the daughter and the brothers, who are obviously outraged at what has taken place. You'll notice that the father begins by talking to Jacob, and he describes how deeply his son desires to marry the girl that he has just violently assaulted. His sick and twisted mind can think of nothing but marrying this girl. Additionally, Hamor the father moves to proposing intermarriage. Give us your other daughters, and we will give you our daughters. And we can intermarry, and you can live in the land, and we can be one big happy tribe. And we'll open up the land to you, and you can have free market, and you can buy more property, and we can just move on and act like nothing has ever happened. Then the attacker, Shechem, enters the conversation, and he offers a large dowry. Just as Jacob allowed Laban to name his price for Rachel, so Shechem will allow Jacob and his sons to name the price for Dinah. Whatever you say, whatever price you want for a dowry, I will be happy to pay it. Notice the condition. Notice the condition for the dowry. If I find favor in your sight. Well, let me go find my gun or my sword or my hatchet or something, and let me show you the favor that you find in my sight. I mean, that's got to be what these brothers are thinking, but in his mind, a large and rich dowry will just kind of smooth it all over as if nothing has happened. It's as if he's just some guy who wants to marry the daughter and the sister, not the guy that has just violently assaulted the daughter and the sister. You will notice in this exchange between the father and the attacker that there is no apology. There's no remorse. There's not even an excuse. It's just marriage, intermarriage, and a large dowry. And we can just get along. Letter E, the deceitful agreement. Verse 13. But Jacob's sons answered Shechem and his father with deceit, because he had defiled Dinah, their sister. Now, we don't know if they went off and had a conversation in private and then came back and laid out this plan before them. But you will notice that Jacob is again silent. He does not utter a single word, and it is the sons that are now the ones that are going to speak. The sons are in control. Jacob, the patriarch, is in the back seat. He is along for the ride. He is at best passive. At worst, he's totally indifferent to what is taking place. So the agreement is that everyone is going to get circumcised. This is verses 14 through 17. They said to them, "We cannot do this thing to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace to us. Only on this condition will we consent to you, if you will become like us, and that every male of you be circumcised. Then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters for ourselves, and we will live with you and become one people. But if you will not listen to us to be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and go." So under the guise of citywide circumcision, the brothers will consent to giving their sister in marriage. That way, they will all be alike, and they can live like one big happy tribe, intermarrying and forgetting the atrocity that Shechem is guilty of. Number two, Hamor and Shechem agree. Sounds like a good plan. I mean, we can get circumcised. That's not really a big deal. I mean, there's a lot to gain here. This takes us from verse 18 all the way down to verse 24. Now their words seemed reasonable to Hamor and Shechem, Hamor's son. The young man did not delay to do the thing because he was delighted with Jacob's daughter. Now he was more respected than all the household of his father. So Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of their city and spoke to the men of their city, saying, "These men are friendly with us, therefore let them live in the land and trade in it, for behold, the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters in marriage and give our daughters to them. Only on this condition will the men consent to live with us, to become one people, that every male among us be circumcised as they are circumcised." Now, I would imagine there'd be some head scratching going on amongst the men of the city, saying, "Well, I don't know about that. What do you mean? We're going to be circumcised so you can marry this girl and we can live like one big happy family." Now, verse 23 is really, really important. It comes into play later, but make note of verse 23. "Will not their livestock and their property and all their animals be ours? Only let us consent to them, and they will live with us." There's something between the line here that is being said to the city population that was not said to Jacob and the brothers. That will be more obvious a little bit later on. Verse 24, "All who went out of the gate of the city listened to Hamor and his son Shechem, and every male was circumcised, all who went out of the gate of his city." So the plan is in place. Everybody thinks that's a good idea. Hamor and Shechem convinced them that this is what they need to do. It's going to be a benefit for everybody, and they all agreed to be circumcised. Letter F in the outline: the sons ravage the city. This takes us from verse 25 down to verse 29. "Now it came about on the third day, when they were in pain, that two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took a sword and came upon the city unawares and killed every male. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the edge of the sword, and took Dinah from Shechem's house and went forth. Jacob's sons came upon the slain and looted the city because they had defiled their sister. They took their flocks and their herds and their donkeys and that which was in the city and that which was in the field, and they captured and looted all their wealth and all their little ones and all their wives, even all that was in the houses." In the heading of chapter 34 in my Bible, this is titled as "The Treachery of Jacob's Sons." Simeon and Levi kill every adult male in the city with absolute barbarity. It is total devastation. While their desire for revenge for what took place to their sister is understandable, killing every male is clearly going above and beyond. They held the entire city responsible. We also learn here that Dinah was being held captive in Shechem's home. That means that Hamor and Shechem were not negotiating honestly. It was likely that they were not going to agree to giving up Dinah, regardless of what terms were ever agreed upon. And so with the city defenseless, all the males dead, the other brothers, and we assume it's all of the brothers, come and loot the city of all the livestock and of everything of value. Now, based upon verse 23, which I drew highlights to, Hamor intended to appropriate all the property and all the possessions of Jacob. And now the sons have appropriated all the possessions and all the livestock of the city. It is a reversal of intent. What Hamor intended to do to Jacob and his sons, Jacob and his sons have done to Hamor and the city by appropriating all of their possessions. It says here at the tail end of verse 24, they even captured the women and the children, but there's no mention of what happens to them. I could not find a single commentator who deals with what happens to the women and the children. We're just not told. It's an absolute mystery. But upon Jacob's deathbed, when he is pronouncing blessings upon his children, he comes to Simeon and Levi and he pauses and he says this. This is recorded in Genesis 49, 5-7. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are implements of violence. Let my soul not enter into their counsel. Let not my glory be united with their assembly. Because in their anger they slew men, and in their self-will they lamed oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will disperse them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Now we learn later that Levi becomes the priesthood of Israel, and that takes place through an act that is much, much later in the establishment of the 12 tribes and acts from other leaders, and I'm not going to get into all of that. But Jacob never lost sight of what took place here in Shechem, and it was a permanent stain on Simeon, and it had a significant impact on Levi until this reversed for him much, much later in his life. But moving back into this present narrative, letter G, Jacob speaks the only recorded words in the entirety of this narrative we find here in verse 30. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have brought trouble on me by making me odious among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites, and my men being few in number. They will gather together against me and attack me, and I will be destroyed, I and my household. So the only recorded words of Jacob in this whole ordeal, he did not condemn his sons for their massacre. He did not condemn them for violating the law of an eye for an eye. He did not mention that they violated their oath with Shechem. He said nothing about desecrating the most significant symbol of faith in Israel, circumcision. There was not a word of concern about what happened to Dinah. Jacob's only stated concern was his self, his survival, and by association that of his family. One commentator sums up the words of Jacob by this: his concerns are tactical and strategic rather than moral. You have to wonder what happened to Jacob after experiencing these incredible victories with Laban and then with Esau and then moving into Shechem. We'll talk about that here in just a second. Letter H, the sons speak. And that brings this terrible chapter to an end. The sons said, verse 34, should he treat our sister as a harlot? Now the sons are given the last word here in this terrible, terrible story. And it's very, very subtle, but notice that Dinah is referred to as their sister, not as Jacob's daughter. Jacob's inaction has shown them that she is more their sister than she is his daughter. It's almost as if, in their mind, he has forfeited the right to call her his daughter. It's an incredibly sad statement for any father to hear, that she is my sister, and the implication is she is not your daughter. Now, I'm going to summarize it in this way, and I want you to listen very, very closely. We're done taking notes, but this is a story about the consequence of partial obedience. Jacob left and he went to Canaan, but he didn't do what he knew he was supposed to do. He knew where he was supposed to go, but for reasons that we're not told, for reasons that we may never understand, he didn't do it. For selfish reasons, Jacob didn't go the last 20 miles to Bethel. He stopped in Shechem and reestablished his life there, bought land, and built an altar. Thinking back to the 20 years he spent with Laban, which were the most miserable years that Jacob could ever imagine, and God miraculously taking him from that and blessing him with more livestock than Jacob could ever utilize. Totally forgot that. Coming to the reunion with a brother who was breathing murderous threats with him, causing him to leave his home 20 years earlier. And Esau loving him and crying on his shoulder like they had been the best of friends all of their life. Totally forgot that. Jacob chose partial obedience, which isn't obedience at all. It's always a delusion to imagine that we have obeyed when we have only partially obeyed. If you tell your son, I want you to take out the trash, and they take the trash bag out of the trash can and they tie it up and they lay it at the back door, and they don't take it outside to the trash can, they've only partially obeyed, right? If God calls us to leave a relationship or a plan or a pursuit or a habit, don't think for a moment that you have obeyed by only partially disengaging from that thing that God has called you to walk away from. In the same way, if God has called us to a specific act of obedience, anything less than full obedience is partial obedience, and partial obedience is simply disobedience. Partial obedience is always disobedience, no matter what our rationalization is. God will not be fooled. God will not be mocked. And his sweet grace can be brutal. Just ask Jacob, who will walk with a permanent limp, when he wrestled with God and wouldn't let go until God blessed him. You know, we often take for granted the infinite love and grace and mercy of God, thinking that the rope God gives us has no end, and we can get away with partial obedience until we go home. But that's a lie from the pit of hell. And one day that rope is going to snap, and it will snap us back to reality. And when it does, we will experience God's grace. But God's grace can be brutal when we pay the the penalty for partial obedience. Would you pray with me, please? Father, we've looked at so many lessons from the life of Jacob. And I think in every one of them we see ourselves. And I pray that we would not be guilty of pointing the finger at someone else, but we would be very quick to recognize our own frailty, our own rebellion. God, I pray that you would give to us a restlessness, an unsettled heart, knowing that we often choose to live in partial obedience. And I pray that we would never be satisfied with that. So I pray for the Spirit's conviction that he would speak as you spoke to Jacob, as you spoke to the great people of faith in the Bible, that it wouldn't fall on deaf ears, that it wouldn't fall on hard hearts. God, we thank you that you are gracious and merciful and long-suffering. But we also know that you love us with a hand that will discipline. And I pray that we would choose the blessing of obedience over the discipline of partial obedience. So, Father, I pray that you would speak and that we would listen and obey as your children who love you more than anything else. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, let's stand. Let's sing to him.